She was homeless and poor. He was rich and powerful. But when he was kidnapped and stranded, she did something no one expected. How did this poor girl end up being this billionaire's savior? Sit back and relax as we dive deep into this heartwarming story. It was a lonely night in the city of Abuja. It was very dark and late when a man named James, a young rich man in the city of Abuja, was driving home from work in his expensive black SUV car. Until something strange happened, his car suddenly turned off and stopped moving for no reason in the middle of the empty and lonely road. So he came down from his car. The road stretched out like a dark, endless ribbon, silent except for the faint rustle of the night breeze. It was so lonely that evening, not a single headlight in sight, yet he had no choice but to press on. His heart thudded faster as he popped open the bonnet, determined to fix the problem quickly before the silence around him turned into something else. To his surprise, the battery wasn't connected to the wires, as if someone had tampered with it. He frowned, wiping the sweat from his brow, and bent forward to reconnect them. That was when it happened. A sound, faint at first, brushed against his ears, the unmistakable crunch of footsteps on dry gravel, slow, deliberate. As if someone was circling him, the air grew heavier. He froze, his hands lingering above the wires, his eyes darting toward the shadows. The darkness seemed to close in, and with each passing second, the strange movements grew louder, nearer, and far more unsettling. Just as he began to lift his head to check, a sudden blow came from behind. The world spun, and before he could even gasp, something sharp-smelling pressed over his face. His body went weak, too weak to fight back. He felt himself being dragged across the rough ground, dry leaves and sticks scraping against his skin. Through the haze, he caught the faint outline of dark figures, their voices low and hurried. They shoved him into the back of a van, the doors slamming shut with a cold finality. The drive was long and disorienting. Every bump and turn made his head throb, his thoughts slipping further away into darkness. When he finally woke up, he was no longer in the van. Damp air and the smell of cement surrounded him. His eyes adjusted just enough to see the walls of an uncompleted building, shadows stretching across the bare concrete. Heavy chains bit into his wrists and ankles, their cold weight telling him this was no accident. He was trapped. By the time Mr. James grasped what was happening, he realized that he had been kidnapped. His abductors came into the room and asked him to tell them his PA's number so they could ask for a ransom. He gave them the number and asked for water. They gave him the water and left. To his surprise, he saw a beautiful, tall, hourglass-figured woman coming toward the building. He immediately signaled for help. Luckily for James, Victoria, the young woman, saw his signal. The moment her eyes caught him, she dropped the firewood, grabbed her cutlass, and ran straight to the building. Without wasting time, she climbed in through the window and used the cutlass to cut the ropes around him. James quickly thanked her, and the two of them hurried off together to her small hut, where they could hide for the night. By the next morning, tension rippled through the kidnappers' camp. Their loud, angry voices cut through the early silence as they fanned out in every direction, searching for James. They tore through the crumbling building where they had kept him, stumped through the neighboring village, and even waded into the cold, shallow streams, hoping to catch a sign of him. But it was useless. James had vanished, as if the earth had swallowed him whole. Frustrated, they grabbed their phones and tried calling his PA, their voices sharp and threatening, demanding the ransom be sent immediately. But the PA, sensing something wasn't right, stalled. "Let me confirm a few details first," she said cautiously, refusing to send the money. Far away from the chaos, in the quiet of a small weathered hut, left behind by Victoria's late grandmother, James sat on a low wooden stool, still trying to process how close he had come to death. Victoria knelt beside a clay pot, scooping cool water into a cup and handing it to him. Her eyes held both kindness and a guarded caution. As he sipped, they spoke for the first time without fear hanging over them. James thanked her, his voice carrying genuine gratitude. "You saved my life, Victoria. I don't even know how to repay you." She smiled faintly, shaking her head. "You don't need to repay me. I've been alone long enough to know what it feels like to be helpless. James, curious, leaned forward. How did you end up living here all alone in the middle of the bush? Victoria's gaze drifted to the floor. She spoke softly, her words carrying the weight of old wounds. I lost my parents in a car accident when I was little. My grandmother raised me after that. She was all I had. But when she passed away suddenly, there was no one left. Just me and this hut. For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the faint rustle of the trees outside. James felt a pang in his chest. For the first time in a long while, he saw strength in someone who had nothing, and it humbled him. James couldn't believe it. How could someone with so little be so willing to give so much? The kindness in her heart humbled him in a way he hadn't felt in years. He cleared his throat and said softly, "Victoria, come with me to the city. My house is big. You'll have a roof over your head, a job to earn your own money, maybe even a chance to go to school one day." His eyes searched hers, hoping she would say yes. Victoria lowered her gaze, her fingers nervously twisting the edge of her wrapper. The thought of living in the city sounded like a dream, but her heart ached at the idea of leaving home. The small hut her grandmother had left her wasn't much, but it was the only thing in the world that truly belonged to her. "I can't," she said quietly, lifting her eyes to meet his. There was a helplessness there, like someone torn between survival and the last piece of their past. "This is all I have left. If I leave, I'll be leaving her too." James didn't give up. "Victoria, your grandmother would want you safe. She'd want you to have more than this." His voice was gentle but firm, and he painted pictures of the life she could have. A steady income, safety, education, a future. Little by little, her walls began to crumble. She could feel the truth in his words, even if it scared her. After a long silence, she nodded slowly, her heart heavy but hopeful. "Okay, I'll go with you." By the next morning, they set off to the nearest town to find a public telephone so James could call his friend to come pick them up. When they arrived at James's house, it was already late. The mansion was well lit, with large windows and trimmed gardens. It was a very big house. Victoria couldn't believe her eyes. She had never seen a house so big, let alone live in one. She was overjoyed. Little did she know at that moment on, her life was about to take a big turn. When they came down from the car, they went straight into the house. Everyone was so happy to see James alive and healthy. James's fiancée pulled him in for a hug immediately and gave him a kiss on the cheek. As soon as James hugged her, Judith at first glance was disgusted as she saw the girl behind James. She dragged James to the corner of the building and asked him who the girl he came in with was. He replied, "Her name is Victoria, and she will be staying with us from now on. She will be a helping hand to us and maybe further her education," he said. Judith's voice shot through the living room like a whip. "This dirty girl in my house. Are you serious? Do you know what people will say?" she barked, glaring at Victoria as if she was a stain on the floor. James let out a slow breath, clearly trying to keep his cool. "Judith, we're engaged, not married. You don't make all the decisions here." His tone was calm but firm. Before she could fire back, he turned and walked away, calling over his shoulder, "Show Victoria to her room." Judith stood there for a moment, fuming. Then, without looking at Victoria, she said sharply, "Follow me." Her heels clicked against the floor as she led the way upstairs. When they reached the room, Judith opened the door and stepped aside. Victoria froze in the doorway, her eyes taking in the neat, cozy space. The bed looked so soft she could almost sink into it without trying. There was a small TV in the corner, a window with blinds, and even a sound system. It felt like something out of another world compared to what she was used to. She walked in slowly and sat on the edge of the bed, her hands resting on her lap. Her heart was still beating fast, not from excitement, but from the argument she had just overheard. Later that night, lying on the soft bed, she stared at the ceiling, unable to relax. Judith's words kept replaying in her head, each one like a reminder that she didn't truly belong here. Deep down, She knew her struggles weren't over. This was only the start. From the moment Victoria started working in the house, Judith wasn't happy with her. She was like a pest to Victoria's life and happiness. Every little mistake Victoria made seemed to be the biggest mistake ever. Missing a spot while sweeping or mopping. Breaking a plate by accident, Judith would shout at her like she had lost a big contract. One morning, Judith snapped and intentionally poured a glass of water on an already spotless floor, then started shouting at Victoria, accusing her of intentionally leaving that part of the sitting room dirty. "I'm sorry, Ma," Victoria said immediately, as she grabbed the mop to clean the water. After she finished, she went to meet her tutor for her home lessons. James had started paying for these lessons months earlier. Victoria always had a passion for helping people, so she was studying to become a doctor. Later that day, when her lessons were over, it was already late, so she went to ask Judith for food. But Judith spiraled, asking her where she was when dinner was being made. Victoria wanted to reply that she was in her usual home lessons James had paid for, but Judith shut her up immediately with her hand, not letting her say a word. She told Victoria that if she wanted to eat, she should go and eat whatever she brought from her wretched hut in the village. "This isn't a charity home where you can get anything for free. Since you didn't work with me in the kitchen, you won't eat dinner. Go back to your lessons, since that's the reason you're here," Judith said. As she left the kitchen, Victoria felt the words of Judith. She wept in tears. Not long after, James came home to find Victoria standing in the kitchen in tears. James asked Victoria the reason for her tears. She tried her best not to bother James with her problem, but James insisted, and she explained what had happened. James left in anger, storming into Judith's room with rage in his eyes and anger in his voice. He demanded to know why she would behave that way. Judith smiled without remorse and said, "You're making this girl too comfortable." James immediately told her to go to the kitchen and serve Victoria food. "She came here to learn and help with little house chores, which she does perfectly fine," he said. Judith was angry but told James she would go and put food for Victoria. A few moments later, she called Victoria to collect her food. When Victoria got to the kitchen, Judith was already leaving. Victoria looked into the bowl. It was just a piece of yam and a lot of soup. She couldn't hold back her tears as she carried the food away to eat. Looking up to the ceiling in tears, she wished her parents were still alive. The next morning, James went out, and on his way back, he bought clothes for both Judith and Victoria. When he got home, he gave them each their packages. Victoria seemed a bit stuck, so she struggled to open it, but Judith immediately tore hers open. She stared at it in disgust. Everyone could see how sour her face looked. "What is this? What is this second-grade red dress doing in my present?" "Wait a minute, James. Don't tell me you went to the market and got me this rubbish." The dress Judith had scoffed at was, in truth, a lovely piece of clothing. Yet, because the material didn't screen well for luxury, she tossed it aside without a second thought. Moments later, Victoria carefully opened her own package and froze, overwhelmed with joy. Tears welled up in her eyes. Her gift was simple, made from second-grade fabric, yet beautiful in its own way. To her, this little gesture from Mr. James meant the world. She had never received presents from anyone before, except her grandmother. Dropping to her knees, she began thanking him over and over. Watching from across the room, Judith quietly slipped away to another part of the house. Mr. James urged Victoria to stand, but she was so happy she could hardly move. He finally helped her up, and in that moment, a warm spark passed between them. Something neither had felt in a long time. Victoria, still flushed with gratitude, politely asked if she could go to bed early so she could rise in time for her home lessons. James agreed with a smile. Later that month, Victoria's tutor arrived as usual, teaching her diligently in preparation for the exam scheduled for the following month. Once the lesson ended, the tutor, Mr. Nicholas, was leaving when he met James in the garden. They shook hands and sat on a nearby stool, talking at length. Before leaving, Mr. Nicholas smiled and said, "Honestly, Victoria is an exceptionally bright girl. At this pace, She could gain admission into any university she chooses. James beamed with pride. Ever since Victoria entered his life, she had impressed him beyond measure. On impulse, he decided to treat her. Entering her room, he found her reading and asked where she might like to go. Without hesitation, Victoria said she'd love to visit a Chinese restaurant, something she had only seen on TV. James told her to get dressed and meet him in the car. A few minutes later, she appeared downstairs in her regular house clothes. James frowned, asking why she hadn't worn the beautiful dress he had bought her. She looked down silently. "Was it Judith?" he pressed. Slowly, Victoria nodded. Anger surged through him. With Judith out for the day with her friends, James stormed into their bedroom and searched her side of the wardrobe. There, he found the exact dress meant for Victoria. He handed it to her firmly. "Put it on." She hesitated. "But, sir—" "No buts," he cut in, "just wear it." Returning to his car, he waited. When she didn't come out right away, he went back inside, only to stop in his tracks. Standing in the sitting room, Victoria looked breathtaking. For a moment, his heart thudded heavily in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Victoria felt it too, though she said nothing. "Are we still going, Mr. James?" she asked politely. He blinked, breaking the spell. "Yes, let's go." They drove to a restaurant not far from his mansion. Soft music drifted from the garden area, and Victoria gazed around shyly, feeling slightly out of place in this new world. When the food arrived, Victoria stared uncertainly at the chopsticks. James quickly realized she didn't know how to use them, and asked the waiter for a fork and knife instead. But as he waited for her to begin eating, he noticed she wasn't holding them right either. With a gentle smile, he leaned forward. "Would you like me to teach you?" Embarrassed, Victoria looked down. "I don't really know how. I've only seen people use them on TV." "That's okay," James reassured her softly. "Let me show you." He reached over, carefully taking her hands, and demonstrated how to hold the knife. She let out a small laugh. "I feel like a child." "You're not a child," he said warmly. "You're just learning. There's nothing wrong with that." They ate quietly for a while, before James asked about her home lessons. He told her he'd heard from Mr. Nicholas, her tutor, that she was making great progress and would soon be able to gain admission into any university she desired. "Yes, sir," Victoria replied with a smile. "Everything's going well, because of you." "Oh no," James said, shaking his head. "You're the one working hard. I should be the one thanking you." Their conversation drifted easily. Dreams, books, hobbies, her past, and her hopes for a brighter future. There was no pressure, no formality. It was just a simple lunch at a Chinese restaurant. But there was a spark between them, and James felt it too. But James knows not to cross boundaries he shouldn't, because he is engaged to Judith and wouldn't want to break her heart. By the time they returned home, Judith had already come back from her outing with friends. She watched them giggle as they stepped inside, and something dark began to grow inside her, full of anger, jealousy, as she couldn't even think straight. She sees it that she is always in competition with Victoria. She didn't say a word that day. A few days later, Judith did something unexpected. She called Victoria to her room. Victoria was startled. Judith had never summoned her before. Nervous, she entered with a worried look. To her surprise, Judith was smiling warmly, something Victoria had never seen. Judith invited her to sit and began apologizing, claiming she had wronged the woman who had saved the love of her life. She begged for forgiveness. Feeling relieved, Victoria accepted, and the two even laughed together. But Victoria had no idea what Judith was planning. Later that day, Judith invited her to share lunch at the dining table. Victoria, touched by what she thought was a fresh start, joined her happily. But halfway through the meal, a sharp, burning pain shot through her stomach. She cried out in agony, collapsing to the floor. At that moment, James was returning from work. He rushed in to find Victoria on the ground, and Judith standing over her with a strange smile. "What happened?" James demanded. "It's done," Judith said cryptically. James wasted no time. He scooped Victoria up and drove to the nearest hospital. The doctors confirmed she had been poisoned, but, by sheer luck, she survived. When she woke, James was sitting by her side. She asked where she was and how she got there, and he explained everything, including Judith's betrayal. After she was discharged, they returned home to find Judith gone. She had fled. 1 year later, Victoria stood outside the gates of her university, wearing a simple dress with her student ID card hanging from her neck. She waited patiently until James's car pulled up. "So, what did you do in class today?" he asked as she got in. "Nothing much, just some practical work and a surgery on a rat," she replied with a laugh. He laughed too, and they drove off together. Then, suddenly, James pulled the car to the side of the road. His voice grew serious as he spoke. Over the past months, he had realized something. He wasn't just her sponsor, he was in love with her. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a small ring box. "Victoria," he said softly, "will you marry me?" She froze in shock, tears flooding her eyes. "Yes, yes, yes, I will marry you." Victoria had always been in love with James, but now her wish finally came through. They embraced tightly, sharing a kiss before driving away together. Dear friends, this story holds a deep truth. Never look down on anyone, for life has a way of turning tables when we least expect it. The person you ignore, mock, or treat as nothing today might be the very one whose hand you will need to survive tomorrow. Power, wealth, and status can fade, but the dignity of every human being remains. And we are all connected by unseen threads, and kindness costs nothing, yet can change everything. So, walk gently in this world, with humility in your heart, and treat every soul you meet with respect, because no one knows whose help they will need in their darkest hour. Dear viewers, what do you think about this story? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the story, give us a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and share it with friends. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest updates. Thanks, and see you in the next video. Bye.